Okay, well, welcome to Black Swan Outdoors. Today we are going to talk about fire and lighting a fire, and this is part of a series that we have on basic wilderness skills. So we talked about layering, we've talked about land navigation, we'll talk now about fire. Fire is an essential skill for any outdoors person. Fire is also an essential skill for a wilderness survival situation. So today we're going to talk about effective strategies in getting a fire started. So we first need to talk, when we're going to talk about fire, we need to talk about the ethics of the fire. And to talk about the ethics of fire, I think we first need to talk about why we need a fire. So back in the olden days, fire was absolutely essential because it provided heat, it provided light, it provided a means of cooking, and the same in a survival situation. It provides heat, it provides the means of signaling with the flame itself, and then also the smoke. And then it provides comfort, warmth, protection perhaps from other animals that you might be concerned with, and then again cooking as well. So a lot of that kind of interplays. Well, with the advent of modern technology in camping gear, the need for a fire has subsided. And it's not a skill that you absolutely have to have. In fact, there's many backpackers and canoeists out there that don't even start fires at all. And they rely 100% on their gear, their clothing, their sleeping bags, their tents, and their stoves. And that's fine, that is okay, until you run into a trouble and you actually have to start a fire in an emergency situation, or you need a fire to augment. Say you run out of fuel, or you just want to have a fire to enjoy, which is perfectly acceptable and fine. Now, on the ethical side, we have to think about other people. So certainly forest fires is a concern. So we have to think of, is having a fire worth the risk? And can we have the fire and do it in a safe manner? And then second, we have to do it is it worth the risk to the environmental destruction that we're creating? It seems pretty ridiculous to have a fire and destroy the environment in which we're to go and to enjoy, just to have a good time. So when we're thinking about a fire and we're thinking about where we're going to have a fire, if it's appropriate to have a fire, we're going to have it as small or as big as we need to have it. So we're going to try to aim for smaller fires, which makes fuel collection and potential destruction to the environment limited. Second, from an environmental standpoint, we want to create a barrier between the living soil and where we're going to have the fire, because the fire itself, the heat, is going to sterilize that soil and kill all the microbes and the animals underneath the soil, in seeds and plants and such. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're having a fire on a durable surface, and that durable surface is going to be rocks or something in that campsite that we have, or of course the fire ring that's pre-existing if that's there, or we're going to have to create something. And so in that case, we're going to get a stuff sack and our trowel for a cat hole. We're going to dig out some mineral soil. We're going to create a mound of soil to build our fire on, and then at the end we're going to burn everything through, and then we're going to put that soil back. So the idea is that when we leave that campsite, there is no trace of us being there. Alternatively, we could bring in like a fire sheet to have, or we can bring in even a biomass stove to have a wood fire. So there's other alternatives that we can use to that. Now, if you're in an area where maybe it's very soggy or there's snow, you might need to build a platform by taking some logs and putting them side by side, like something like this, where that you have a cleared, clean, dry place in which you can have a fire, and then the logs themselves insulate the wood, or insulate the fire from damage from down below, so that when the snow melts away, there isn't a fire scar left at that location. So when we talk about building a fire is no different than a combustion engine in the fact that it needs fuel, it needs spark, and it needs oxygen. So the first thing we want to do is we want to collect as much fuel as we possibly can. And I'm going to subdivide fuel into 3 categories. The fuel itself, which are large logs, so anything maybe wrist size and larger. And generally when we want to keep a fire small, we want to aim for something that's about the size of your wrist, no bigger, because we can burn that through. So when given the opportunity, we want to stick with something in and around that wrist size that's burnable, that when we're done with the fire, it's going to be an ash, and we're not having to deal with logs that haven't been burnt through. Next is going to be your kindling. And your kindling is generally going to be something about finger or pencil width in size. So pretty small. And that's kind of an intermediary to the starting the fire. The next would be tinder. And tinder is natural material that is small, light, dry, wispy, and has lots of surface area. So something like twine here. This is a natural, or unnatural, this is man-made tinder that you could use. And it's just balled up. And this is what's going to catch that spark. Then from there, this is going to heat up fast and quick, is the idea. And then what we want to do is we want to catch that heat and that flame to start burning the kindling. And then that's going to burn and create more heat, and then eventually is going to burn then that fuel source that we have, that stick or that log. And so if you were just to take a match, for example, and take the match and try to light the wood, you're going to see even this dry wood, it's going to take a lot of energy and a lot more time to get it started. And so you can see it just getting started, but if this was wet or if this was any larger, it could be very difficult to get that started. And so it's kind of futile. And I've seen a lot of people try to build a fire without tinder, for example, just trying to take a match to either the fuel source or just the kindling, and not seeing a whole lot of success with that. Certainly if you have dry enough kindling, like this is bone dry, you can certainly use that as a tinder in a sense, and sticks. Other sources of tinder can be fungus, it could be mosses, it could be needles, it could be leaves, it could be grasses, cattails, old man's beard, pine cones, dust that you've carved out of the stick itself, or the kindling that you've broken down. It could be a number of sap, even a number of different natural elements. The problem with kindling, or tinder rather, when finding it in the woods, is oftentimes, especially if you've gone through 2 or 3 days of rain, there's a lot of that same material that's tinder is what's called hypophilic, means it loves moisture, so it's going to absorb moisture. So grass that might work once while it's dry isn't going to work very well as a tinder when it's wet. And so what you want to do is you want to find things that are up above the ground as best possible in the air, that the air is going to dry, so up high. When you're collecting your tinder, you're going to collect your tinder oftentimes from the same fuel source. So it's going to be the top of a branch that might have fallen down. What we want to aim for is branches, dead things that are dry, that are laying on the ground. We don't want to use wet things or live plants. And so we want to be able to take dead wood that's already been blown down or have fallen as widowmakers onto the ground, and use that before we think about trying to cut down trees. And I know a lot of people like the idea of cutting down a tree, but it's not a good ethical practice at all. And so when we choose to have a fire, we want to choose to have fire in the most ethical possible way. So a tinder can be collected, or a kindling can be collected from the fuel source quite often, but also separately from branches and sticks that are in the ground, again, about this size. And we want them to be dry. So we have the tinder, we have the kindling, and then the fuel that we've talked about that have all collected. And the key to building a fire is having all three of these things ready to go. And so you want a pile of wood that's going to be your fuel source, a pile of wood that is going to be your kindling, and then your tinder. And you want a fairly large amount of tinder, as much as you possibly can, again, so that, especially if it's wet, that you can get that enough heat to start burning the wood. Now, there are certain things that you can do with starting your fire, like, for example, preparing wood with a knife or a cutting source. And so you can take some of the kindling, and cut it in half, or even baton it. You'll see a lot of videos where people do that, and you're basically exposing the dry inner wood that's in here, and that's going to light faster and quicker than trying to light the moist wood on the outside. So lots of wood, especially larger chunks of wood, is going to have a nice dry inner core that you can get to get that fire started. And then you can use the fire itself to dry the remaining wood as well over the course of the time that you're enjoying your fire. All right, so when we talk about oxygen, this is where having a fire lay and a fire lay strategy is important. And there's different types of fire lays that are available, and they have different means, and sometimes it's just a matter of preference. That the advantage of the different fire lays sometimes doesn't really make that much of a difference, and sometimes it makes a great difference. So probably one of the most iconic fire lays that we think about when we think about a campfire is a teepee fire lay. And the teepee fire lay looks pretty similar to this little demonstration. And you get some fairly larger sticks. You start your fire inside the teepee, inside here, with your tinder and your kindling, and then you basically build up from there. And so the idea behind the teepee fire is that the air blows inside here and it comes up. And so that concentrates a high amount of heat at the top of the fire and also projects a lot of light out into your campsite. So if you have a pot hanging over over your teepee fire, it's going to be able to bring a lot of heat up into that pot to boil that water very quickly, as well as providing light into your campsite, which is fantastic. Another fire, and the advantage of this fire is it goes up very fast, very quick. So if you need to get a fire going very fast, the teepee fire is great. Another fire lay that you can use and very popular is the log cabin style. Basically, you're using logs, crisscrossing them over each other. In this style of fire, you're actually lighting on the inside of the log cabin and letting it burn down. So this is going to burn at a pretty moderate to slower pace compared to the teepee fire. So you're not going to have to add fuel to that fire as readily. This is a great fire for cooking, for building ashes and cooking over. So if you're going to cook meat or something that you need a good amount of heat off of, but not a lot of flame, this works really well. Also, it provides a lot of heat for people too. So if you had a backstop, for example, like this, behind this fire, it will project that heat over to the people who are enjoying the fire. And again, you're going to use the inside of the fire to start, the inside of that log cabin, and build onto it and let that burn down. And so the structure itself then acts as a wind block, so that if you're in windy conditions, you can get that fire going pretty quick. An alternative to these two styles of fire lays is what's called the lean-to. And the lean-to basically starts with a log or a rock or something that's going to give you the ability to give some protection to your tinder down below. And then you're just going to light your fire protected by the wind, and then from there you're going to build your fire off of the lean-to in that lean-to structure. So if you're in a really windy environment, you can get a fire going. I have found that this is the best method to get the fire going the fastest. It's the least amount of structure, and you're adding, it takes concentration and effort, or attention rather, but you can get a fire going very, very fast. You just have to have all of your supplies around you so that you can add them quickly to that fire as needed to continue feeding that fire. So you have to feed that fire much more readily than you would these other two styles. Now there's some other two different styles of fire lays that also work really well. One is what's called the star lay, and this is what Native Americans would do when they would start their fires often, or if you didn't have a large axe or saw, but you had a lot of longer pieces of wood, then what you would do is you'd start your fire in the middle of these logs, and as they burn, you push more and more wood into the fire. And so these would burn down, and so you're pushing that wood through, and it could be larger sticks or smaller logs work well. So that's a good one if you don't have other tools to break down that wood. And the key when you're collecting your wood, and this is why this is important, is you don't want to process the wood where you find it. You want to bring the wood to your campsite and process it in your campsite because it's a lot more efficient. So if you're bringing larger logs to your campsite, for example, you're bringing all this wood, and you're not spending time and energy breaking that down and processing. The last type of fire lay that we'll talk about is what's called the pyramid fire lay. And this is a kind of a crude representation of it, but basically you have large base logs, and they could be very large logs or much larger logs. And as you build up, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you start this fire from the top of the pyramid. And then what it does is over the course of time, it burns down. So this is a great source of heat for like a larger group of people, or a source of light for a larger group of people where you're doing other tasks and you don't want to have to add more fuel to your fire continuously. So over the course of 1 or 2 hours or so, this fire will slowly burn down. It's not going to produce a lot of heat, but it's going to produce light, and it's not going to be require a lot of maintenance. So we have different fire lays for the different levels of maintenance and use and utility that we can gravitate towards. So those are the different types of fire lays, and why that's important is it helps regulate the amount of oxygen that's exposed to that fire. Oxygen is very important, so much so that what you can use when you're starting a fire is you want to get fire in there, so you can use or you want to be able to blow into that fire to get oxygen going when you started the fire, especially in a teepee fire or a log cabin fire that's kind of enclosed and might not get enough oxygen. You might generally don't have a problem with the lean-to fire as much, because if the prevailing wind is blowing this way, you can use the wind then as a tunnel, as a wind tunnel, the wind blocker as a tunnel or the lean-to part, to actually funnel that wind and get the fire going very, very fast. If you can't, you need more oxygen, then you have to get down into the ground and blow into it. And so what I like to carry is a bellows tube. And this bellows tube basically is just a nylon tube and allows me to blow into the fire. And what that does is when you increase that oxygen, it's going to burn faster and hotter. So to get that fire going very, very fast, very hot, and get that material going. So if it's wet wood or if I need that fire going fast, a bellows tube is going to do it. Even if it's just a small little fire, I can just put a little bit of oxygen on and then blow more and more and more oxygen, and I have a roaring fire in seconds. Alternative to that is just to take your fingers and make a diamond shape with your 4 fingers, just like this, and blow into that, and that will help project that oxygen onto the fire as well without having to get your face into the dirt and smoke. Alternatively, too, is you could use a frisbee or another material and just, or even paper or whatever you have, and just wave over the fire, and you can get that fire going very fast as well. Okay, so now we've talked about these fire lays. Let's talk a little bit about how the ignition sources and how to get the fire going. So in my kit, myself, what I carry is something to process the wood with. So I have a pocket knife that also has a saw on it, which is quite helpful, not necessary. The bellows tube. I have an emergency fire starting kit, which is basically just tinder. And then I have a lighter, because it's easy, it's fast. I have a thing of matches, and then I have a ferro rod. So we'll talk a little bit about the appropriate usage in starting fire with these things. So let's start with matches. In the matches case, I don't just carry one type of match. I like to have a different variety of matches. And so what I have here are lifeboat matches, strike anywhere matches, and just regular wood matches. What I'll often do is just dip some of the regular matches into paraffin wax, like from a candle, and that'll help waterproof it in case there's moisture. These lifeboat matches already have a water resistance coating on there. And then the strike anywhere matches are fantastic also for emergencies in case my striker paper that I have from just a matchbox gets wet or lost. I can get a fire going by striking this on a rock or my zipper and get that fire going. Now, you have to keep in mind that the fire, the small, tiny little stick matches here aren't going to burn as long as a big match here. So if you've got wetter wood or wetter tinder to get started, you might want something that's going to burn a lot longer, a little hotter than the small little stick match. And for a real bad emergency, when you really need to get a fire going, these things are very hard to blow out. They're water resistant, and they have a long, long burn time. So having options and matches is really important. What we often don't talk about is how to start a fire with a match. And there is a proper technique to doing that. Because if you push too hard on the stick, you're going to crack the match. So what you want to do is you want to put your finger onto the tip of the match, and what you want to do is you want to strike in an even pressure across the striker, so that you're not breaking the tip. And that's really an important part of lighting a match off of your box. Alternatively, you have a lighter. These are super handy, super nice. The problem with the lighters are that they run out of fuel eventually, or this plunger could be depressed and then let all the fuel out. An advantage to a lighter, though, is you at least have the striker, so you can get a fire going even if you don't have the lighter itself. It's like a 2-for-1. So it's quick, it's convenient, and these are especially convenient for when you're lighting a stove. So, but it's always nice to have, if you have using a lighter as your primary means of starting a fire, it is always nice to have matches as a backup in case you need them. Alternatively, we can go with the ferrocerium rod. The ferrocerium rod is at the top part of this. This is magnesium, the silver part. And so the idea here is that I can take my awl and I can scrape off pieces of this magnesium. This could be the back of your knife or even your knife blade if you absolutely had to. But I'm going to get a bunch of this magnesium here piled up, right? And then when I go to strike, what I want to do is I want to put my ferro rod or ferrocerium rod near the place that I want to start, and I'm going to pull back on the rod. That way, if I'm going forward, I could potentially hit the stuff that I want to light. So I'm going to pull back on the rod and get a spark. Right onto this little bit, and it's going to start. It's going to start that flame, and then hopefully get the tinder or whatever else I have started. Little bits of string, just like this, teased out to create lots of surface area, make for a great bird's nest style of tinder to start a fire as well. But it can get wet, and then remember it's hydrophilic, so it's going to like the moisture, and it'll be pretty much useless if it is wet. So I always carry a emergency fire starter with cotton balls and lint. Now, any cotton ball or any material like that's light and wispy can burn very, very fast and very hot and get a fire started. However, it burns almost too fast, too hot. So what we want to do is we want to be able to, we could take this bit of cotton and we can impregnate it with petroleum jelly. Okay? And when we do that, what it's going to do is it's going to regulate that burn time. So you can see side by side, this is burning very fast. This is burning slower and much hotter and much, much longer. So it's going to burn and continue to burn. So if you do have wetter Kindling or Tinder to get started, this is going to do a much better job of it. And it's very easy, very inexpensive. You can go to the store and buy commercial-made tinder as well, or emergency fire starter, or you can very easily make it yourself and carry it with you. And there's different types of fire starters out there. This is probably just one of the best, I think, and accessible. Okay, so another tinder that you can use is what's called char cloth. And basically, char cloth has to be pre-made. You get a tin, like something like this. This is for spices. You can use Altoid cans. And then what you do is you basically take your awl from your pocket knife, punch a hole in here, and then you find some piece of cloth. This could be cotton from an old bandana. Jeans work really well. Anything that's 100% cotton or 100% plant material based. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this container and put this on the fire, and you're going to see some smoke. And what's going to happen through pyrolysis is that it's going to take all of the oxygen, and it's going to turn this into what's called char cloth. When it's done, it's going to stop smoking, which is what the hole is going to indicate. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this out, and it's going to be charred and black. And oftentimes the container that you make your char cloth in can be your tinder box, and you keep your tinder very dry. So back in the olden days, back in the like the 1600s, 1700s, when people would carry and make char cloth, they would carry it in a tinder box that would keep their tinder very dry. So when they got a fire started, they could get that fire going very fast and quick. Oftentimes they were relying on flint and steel. And so to get a fire started, you need something very, very dry, and you have to get the smallest little spark to get the tinder cloth started. So in many places, cloth was a premium, so they didn't really actually use cloth. They used different types of dried plant material, as well as I'm sure some used some cloth. So this is a good alternative way to start a fire. Now, oftentimes in survival situations, people think of flint and steel. What we're doing here is actually we're looking for a rock that is harder than the steel itself. So when we're chipping with the striker, this piece of steel, we're chipping off a piece of the iron or the steel itself, not the rock, because the rock is actually harder. So flint works great because it has a great rock wool hardness, but also quartz and many other hard rocks will work. So when people are looking at a survival knife, for example, they oftentimes talk about how a Swiss Army knife isn't a good survival knife because it's not 1095 steel. The reason why people like 1095 steel, it's a good balance in price and performance, but it's also soft enough that if you strike it off the back of a hard rock, you can get a fire started. So oftentimes people confuse 1095 steel or the need for a knife to get a fire started, and they call flint and steel with a magnesium the same thing. The magnesium is what we're sparking off on the knife, or off the material. Magnesium is what we're striking off, whereas on the knife it's not coming off. And so what you want is a 90-degree spine on the back of your knife so that you can strike the material off, cut that off without sacrificing the sharpness of your blade. So if you have a knife that has an awl on the back of it, you can use that then to start the fire without getting your main blade dull. And so there's always a lot of confusion about regards around that. Another way that you can start a fire is with a magnifying glass. So you could use the telephoto lens of a camera. You could use, sometimes eyeglasses can get us started. But you're basically going to put this in the sun, and then it's going to have a little tiny dot. And the smaller the dot, the more concentrated that heat is going to be. So you're going to adjust the height of your magnifying glass to concentrate the small dot onto a piece of tinder of whatever kind. And then you're going to hold it there until it starts smoking, and then it'll eventually light. You can blow on it and get it to light. Another method of emergency fire starting is flint wool and a battery. So a 9-volt battery, you could use a car battery, you could use many other types of batteries, or any kind of steel. And then you're just going to take the battery, put it in here. You can see it smoking already. And then put your tinder on here and get that to light. And then once it's lit, you can blow on it or whatever you need to do, and then put it in your fire lay and get it going. So this is a very easy way to get a fire going. All right, so the other thing I didn't mention before was Zippo lighters are often used, and they're fun, they're very iconic. The problem with the Zippos is they run out of fuel very quickly. This one is a special case that helps kind of keep the fuel from evaporating out. Other types of unnatural, side is paper, of course, too. So if you had bits of paper from a notebook or whatever, you can use that to get your fire started along with your tinder. So that's pretty much fire starting. You're going to see a lot of videos and a lot of techniques and a lot of things out there. A couple things that I'll note just myself that I see a lot on YouTube in particular is batoning, where you have a piece of wood that you're kind of break down, a large piece of wood. And we talked about that earlier. And when you baton, it can be potentially dangerous. It can be very dangerous. So you need to do it very carefully. But it's also kind of an overused skill. It's not a skill that a lot of people have to rely on or have to need. So a lot of times people use that in justification for a larger knife, needing a larger knife. I've batoned tinder with this and got many, many fires started without having to worry about batoning something big. Second to that, another thing that's kind of overblown is the use of fungus or for fire starting. So different types of dry funguses can be collected and used to start fires, which is awesome, and it's a great skill. But it's not something that I would use to rely on. It's just kind of a nice extra kind of skill to know how to identify and find those different funguses for starting fires. So when you want to put together a kit to start a fire, matches are certainly awesome. They're cheap, they're readily available. If you wanted to buy a ferro rod, again, they're great. They're great for starting lighting a stove, lighting a fire. They have thousands and thousands of fires you can get started with the ferro rod. The lighter is the easiest way to get a fire going, the fastest way to get a fire going. But you'll find that if you have wet wood and you're holding your flame to the fire, you're going to burn your finger. But that heats up very quickly, so you want to keep that in mind in that. And then, as far as tinder goes, an emergency tinder is always good to have. Some kind of pocket knife for processing even the smallest of wood, doesn't have to be the biggest of wood. Bringing in some natural tinder, and then of course your bellows tube, which is super handy to have. So with that is Fire 101. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, and stay tuned for more videos.
Okay, so what I want to do is I want to start a fire, all right? And I've got an area that's cleared away from debris, mostly. I built up a little fire pit here. Now, what I want to do is I want to have everything ready to go when I'm building a fire. So I'm not looking for things at the last minute or trying to procure the tinder or the fuel or the kindling that I need. So Okay, well, welcome back to Black Swan Outdoors. So today I'm out on a recce hike, just a practice hike, and I like to do these things every spring, kind of refresh some of the skills if I haven't been out for a while, things like that. So today we're going to teach you how to light a fire. So first and foremost, you want to be able to make sure that you can have the fire in an area that is safe, not only for yourself, but also for the environment. So you want to make sure that you've cleared off an area. I've kicked off some dead and dry stuff off to the side, things that could light. I've built up the area here with some rocks. You certainly don't have to do that, but that's something that you can certainly do to help contain the flame. And then lastly, you want to make sure you're protecting the environment as well. So you're not, when you start a fire on the ground, you're actually burning and killing all the microbes and killing the live soil that's underneath it. So you want to keep that in mind as you're in an area moving through, that you're moving with the least, to leave no trace and least trace possible. So second is what I want to do is I want to have all of my material gathered, and I want to get some fuel. I can gather more fuel as my fire is going, but I want to make sure I have my kindling and my tinder. Now, what do I mean by fuel? Fuel is all of the stuff that I'm going to use for the fire. So if I'm using a fire to light, for light, or for signaling, or for cooking, that's what I'm fueling the fire of. So the size of the fire and the need of the fire is going to be dictated by the fuel that I'm going to need. So if I want a very tall, bright fire, I'm going to arrange my fuel in such a way that it illuminates the light the best. And I want something that's going to burn dry and hot, so it's very bright. Now, if I'm during the daytime and I'm using a fire to signal, then I'm going to want fuel that is wet. I want to dampen that fuel so that it produces more smoke, because the smoke is going to be seen farther than the light of the fire is. Now, if I'm cooking, then I'm going to have specific types of wood. I can get very specific about the type of wood that I want, but I'm generally going to be cooking on coals. So I want big fat wood that's burnt down and produce coals, and that's a lot easier to cook on. So, and again, if it's warmth, then I want to arrange the fire in such a way that it's going to be reflecting heat on me. And so there are different types of ways, and you can set up your fire. Certainly, what's very popular is the Dakota fire pit if you want to have a low signature, where there's a low light signature, but you can still do a little cooking and get a little heat. But most people are going to have a fire on the ground. And in that case, we need to be careful about is the fact that the soil that we're having the fire on is living. And so anything that underneath that fire that the fire is on is going to kill that soil, and that's going to leave trace. So what we want to do is we want to bring in mineral soil from another place in a ditty bag or a stuff sack. This is an absolutely established fire ring, so I'm not going to have to do that today. This is my fire ring that I use when I come out just to have a fire, hang out, and chill. So this is established, as I said, and I've put a bit of a ring to kind of contain embers and flame and whatnot. So so the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure I have that material, as I said, ready to go. So anything that's less than an arm's length or a thickness of a wrist, really kind of the thickness of your fingers or so, is going to be your kindling. All right, so think of like a pencil size, or maybe slightly larger, slightly smaller. Larger stuff like this is going to be more of my fuel, and certainly I can get bigger fuel depending on the tools that I have and the wood that is around me. Lastly then is our our tinder. Now our tinder is going to be material that can burn hot and fast. So the idea here when you're starting a fire is you use oxygen, spark, and fuel, just like a combustion engine, to get it going. So when I spark something, whether it be a match or a lighter or a ferrocerium rod, I want to be able to get a material that's going to burn fast and hot. So that could be grasses here, leaves, it could be cattails, it could be even tinder that I've made that's pre-made, like Vaseline and cotton balls or cotton or lint. Oftentimes people like to carry their own tinder because it's harder to procure. On a day like this, tinder can be a little bit harder to find. I'm in this early spring now, late winter, And that means that after 2 feet of snow has melted, anything that would have been flammable or tinder is wet. And why this is important is things like grass and other kind of fluffy material that you might find that you might think will burn hot and fast, and maybe sometimes will, you'll find it have a hard time getting a spark. And that's because that material is what's called hyperphilic. It loves water, just like our clothing and our layering. We talked about that, and why you don't want to wear cotton, for example. It's hyperphilic, so it's going to love that moisture. So it may be very hard to procure dry material. So then you're going to look above the ground for material like sticks that you can carve down. You're going to look for bark. You're going to look for grasses. So one of the things is in procuring material is having a good knife. For everybody that talks crap about serrated blades, from a fire starting standpoint, this is a very useful tool, the serrations on here. For me, I'm going to look for grasses that are above the ground of where the snow was, to find hopefully the driest grasses I can. And when you're collecting grasses, it's nice to collect it with an instrument like a saw. Serrations on a knife do just the trick. So I can saw right through that material, whereas if I took my knife of equal sharpness, it's going to have a lot harder time getting through that material. Second is I can use this to scrape. So I can create little fine pieces of dust or chips, just like this, and find something dry in here, and I can scrape that off. Now, alternatively, I can also use the back of my knife if you have a 90-degree spine, and get the same effect. See all that dust right there? And then lastly is with the serrations, I can use it kind of as a makeshift saw, so that I can cut in here if I wanted to do a specialty notch, for example, like an L7 notch or a box notch or log notch, if I'm building traps or contraptions or whatever. So I do like the serrations on my knives. And if I do need to do fine work, I can always choke up on the blade doing a pinch grip. So, but we're talking about fires here today. Lastly is you'll see on videos people doing with their survival knives, doing batoning. And batoning, they often do it with their fuel wood, which is fine, and that there's no knock on that. But you can still baton your kindling. So this kindling is probably going to be fairly wet, at least on the outside, but maybe on the inside it's not going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to baton some of this kindling. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to expose some of this dry inner wood in here, and that's going to light a lot faster. And I can even make some really small bits of kindling as well that I can use to get that fire started. Now, key is lots of small, light, high surface area stuff. Get that fire as hot as you can, and then you can use that fire to actually dry out the wet wood and to get it to burn more effectively. Now, as far as a lay, the different types of lays, there's all sorts of different types of lays. You can do a pyramid or a teepee lay, which you're going to get the fire up high like this and then light inside here. You can do a traditional log cabin lay, and it's going to look something like this. And this is great. So there's a couple different ways in which you can start your fire and burn your fire. If you want a long-lasting fire that you're not feeding all the time, you can build a log cabin fire, build it up, and then it'll burn down and produce lots of light for long periods of time. Alternatively, if you need to get light quickly, you can just do the teepee lay, and it's going to get the flame up high. And so in this area here, it's going to illuminate a large area. If you're cooking, you want something down low. And so you're going to take your big fat fuel logs at the bottom, light in the inside of the log cabin, burn everything down into an ash, and then you can start cooking. So the key is, like I said, is you being able to get everything ready to go as if you're going to get that fire started. That way, you're not running around, and if you get that spark going, and if you're in a survival situation, you need to get that fire going and you need to get going fast, you need to be just ready to be able to react. So you have everything with you ready to go. So let's take a look at this grass. Let's see how dry it is. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get it started on that. If not, then we're going to move on to another technique to get this started. So the key here is to pull back on the ferro rod. Now again, I've got these little things pre-made. Now the fire here is smoky. You see how smoke that is? It's because it's from that grass that was down lower that's full of moisture. It's producing a lot of smoke. So what I'm trying to do here now is, the tinder that I have is a little wet and it's going to dry as the fire continues. So I just want to keep it hot and fast here. And eventually some of that inner core is going to dry out. So I could take my stick, baton some more. See that dry inner core of this stick here is going to light a lot faster, a lot more effective. And so you don't need a big fat survival knife. You don't need to use big wood to baton. It's kind of a, you know, one of those skills that people see online and then they just repeat over and over and over again. Now you can see this fire is now settling. That means it's becoming alive. It's becoming on its own. The wood has now caught, the kindling has caught, some of the fuel has caught on, and the fire is now going to, I can build this up. I can do whatever I want with it, burn it down and cook on it, whatever I need to do. So a couple things too is, if I wasn't able to get this started, I would kind of resort on using some of this fine debris to see if I get it to spark. I could also make a fuzz stick too. And a fuzz stick is, let's see, I think I just burnt all my good wood, is basically, I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to cut little feathers in here, feather stick or fuzz stick. And I'm just taking my knife and I'm looking for an edge, like right here, and I'm going to push down on it. And the finer the feather, or finer the fuzz, the faster that's going to catch. And so I can prep the stick, and it doesn't really have to look pretty. I mean, you can spend time crafting really nice feather sticks, but it's all going to do the same. So small, fine, little guys here are all going to catch. And that's going to help get that fire started. So many ways to start a fire, many different techniques. You can be very creative with it, and very fun about like the challenges of trying to get a fire started and looking for your material and putting your material together. And I find it to be one of the most rewarding parts of the outdoors, is sitting by a fire that you've made with one match or one strike of the ferro rod. So that's fire starting for you.